Sometimes I can't help but think how my life might have turned out if my father hadn't passed away that warm April morning. I was just 7 then, but that day is etched in my memory. Dad was in the kitchen making his famous Sunday waffles, always shaping them into silly animal faces just to hear me laugh. Mom was pouring orange juice, humming some old tune I can't quite remember now. "Emma, sweetheart, come help your old man flip these masterpieces," Dad called out, waving his spatula like a sword. I tossed aside my favorite plush puppy and ran straight into his arms. And then it happened. The spatula clanged on the tile floor as Dad clutched his chest, his smile vanishing into a grimace of pain. What followed was a haze of flashing ambulance lights, hushed hospital halls, and Mom sobbing into her hands. Just like that, my father was gone, and our house seemed to grow colder and emptier overnight. Mom didn't stay alone for long, though. She met Paul at a local grief support group for single parents. He was gentle, tall, with warm brown eyes that reminded me a little of Dad's. Within a year, they were married, and he moved into our little house on Pine Street. I was trying to get used to having Paul around when Mom surprised me again. She was having another baby. Her eyes sparkled when she told me I'd soon be a big sister. I was 9 when my brother Lucas was born, and from that moment on, everything shifted. Mom left her job at the public library, saying over and over, "Lucas needs me, I can't miss these important years." I wanted so badly to ask whether my early years hadn't been important too, but I never managed to get the words out. I just watched as Mom's world slowly shrank until it revolved only around Lucas. She'd forget to sign my permission slips or pack my lunch. When I told her, she'd blink, kiss my forehead absent-mindedly and say, "Oh, sorry honey, I had to take Lucas to his pediatric checkup." It wasn't just now and then. It became our new routine. Paul saw it too. Sometimes during dinner I'd catch him glancing at Mom, his brow furrowed, while she cut Lucas's meat into tiny bites and ignored the rest of us. One evening, while I was at the dining table struggling with my science homework, Paul sat down next to me. "You know, Emma," he said softly, pointing out my mistakes with infinite patience, "sometimes grown-ups focus so hard on one thing, they forget to see the rest." As Lucas grew older, the tension between Paul and Mom only grew worse. Paul tried over and over to talk to her about her smothering ways, but she always snapped back. One night, Lucas was about 4, pouting at his untouched dinner, while Mom hovered beside him, urging, "Just one more bite for Mommy, please." "Anna," Paul said, setting down his fork carefully, "we need to discuss this. You're babying him too much. He needs to learn some independence." "What are you implying? That I'm neglecting my own child?" Mom shot back, her voice icy. "That's not what I'm saying, and you know it," Paul said calmly. "You have 2 kids, not just 1. And a husband too, remember." I kept my eyes glued to my peas, but every word lodged deep in my chest. "I was little once too," I whispered, but no one heard me. Things reached a breaking point when Paul suggested signing Lucas up for a kids' soccer team. I was sitting on the staircase pretending to read when I heard Mom's shrill refusal echo through the kitchen. "Absolutely not. Soccer is dangerous. He could break a leg or get a concussion. For heaven's sake, Anna, he needs to play with other kids and get dirty sometimes. He's not made of glass." Mom didn't budge. Instead, she signed him up for beginner piano lessons at the community center. I still remember Lucas sitting there, pounding the keys aimlessly while other kids practiced scales. He quit after a month, and Mom blamed the teacher for stifling his natural talent. Meanwhile, Paul spent more time with me, maybe trying to balance things out, or maybe he just saw a lonely kid craving a grown-up's attention. He never missed a single swim meet, cheering the loudest when I got my medals. But while I thrived under Paul's care, Lucas turned into a spoiled handful. His room was always a battlefield of toys and half-eaten snacks. Mom would turn to me with that look I hated so much. "Emma, honey, can you tidy up Lucas's room for me? I just can't manage everything today." It wasn't really a request. One day, Paul found out what was happening. "She is not his maid, Anna," he said firmly. Lucas needs to pick up after himself. That was the moment Mom burst into tears, playing her trump card. I knew it. You care more about Emma than your own son. How could you treat Lucas like this? I saw the hurt flicker across Paul's face. His shoulders dropped, and the argument drained right out of him. He looked at me, guilt and apology written all over his face, then lifted his hands in defeat. Fine, Anna. Whatever you want. And just like that he stopped fighting with her about Lucas. But the way he looked at me afterward told me he hadn't given up on me, just on battling with Mom. It wasn't much, but sometimes that tiny bit of comfort was all I had. Graduating high school felt both freeing and bittersweet. Standing in my navy gown among a sea of classmates, I scanned the bleachers until I spotted Paul, clapping the loudest. Mom was there too, but I caught her glancing at her phone every few minutes, probably checking in with Lucas's babysitter. That evening, Paul called me into his den. He pulled out a folder bursting with college brochures. I've been putting some money aside for you, he said, beaming. Pick any school you want, Emma. Nothing's off limits. Before I could answer, Mom stormed in, her voice sharp. You can't be serious, Paul. That money should be for Lucas. He'll need it so much more. Paul's jaw tensed into that stubborn expression I'd seen so often. This isn't up for debate, Anna. I've made up my mind. In the end, I chose Marshall University in West Virginia. Far enough to breathe but close enough to come home when I wanted. On move-in day, Paul drove me to campus alone. Mom stayed behind because Lucas gets anxious if I'm gone too long. College felt like the freedom I'd always craved. For the first time, I wasn't living in Lucas's shadow. I called home every week, but it was usually Paul who answered. Mom was perpetually busy handling Lucas. One evening during a call, Paul's voice sounded drained. Lucas is having a rough time, Emma. He's fallen in with some neighborhood kids who are a bad influence. I tried signing him up for some after-school stuff, but... Let me guess, I cut in, already knowing. She said you were too strict. Paul chuckled dryly. Right on the nose. She thinks I'm too hard on him, that I just don't get how sensitive he is. My trips home became rare as Lucas got worse. When I did visit, he barely acknowledged me, locked away in his dark room surrounded by game consoles. Once, I knocked on his door and offered to take him out for lunch. He didn't even look up, just grunted while gunshots and shouting blared from his game. Mom, passing by, shrugged. He's not up for socializing today, Emma. He's under so much stress. It was hard to ignore how differently our lives had turned out. While I was building a life step by step, Lucas was racking up virtual scores, propped up by Mom's constant excuses. Paul's tired eyes said he hadn't stopped caring, but he'd stopped hoping Mom would ever change. By 27, I'd finally scraped together enough for a down payment on a tiny but charming one-bedroom place in a safe part of town. Holding those keys was one of the proudest moments of my life. You all have to come see it, I said excitedly during my weekly call. I'm throwing a housewarming next Saturday. I'll even cook your favorite, Paul, homemade lasagna. Paul's warm laugh came through the line. Wouldn't miss it for the world, kiddo. Mom's voice piped up faintly in the background. Oh, sweetheart, I don't think we can make it. Lucas has plans that day. I couldn't help but scoff. Plans? Really? Like what? Mom hesitated, then said vaguely. They're very important. In the background, Lucas's video game gunfire roared on. When the day came, only Paul showed up, carrying a leafy houseplant and a bottle of wine. Your mom sends her love, he said, but we both knew that wasn't true. Over dinner, he filled me in on the rest. Lucas, now 20, had never bothered with college, spent his days gaming or hanging out with his drinking buddies. Paul had offered him an entry-level job at his construction company, a chance to learn some discipline and earn his own money. I told him everyone starts somewhere, Paul said, twirling his fork. But Anna, she insisted it would be beneath him. So manual labor is beneath him, but living off you two isn't. He muttered. Paul gave me a sad smile and squeezed my hand across the table. I keep trying, Emma. God knows I keep trying. That ended up being the last genuine conversation Paul and I ever shared. 3 years later, my phone rang with the news that would turn my world upside down. Paul had collapsed at a job site. Another massive heart attack just like my father's. By the time I reached the hospital, he was already gone. The funeral felt like a bad dream. Mom put on an elaborate performance, weeping into tissues and clinging to every guest, moaning about what an incredible husband Paul had been. "We were so happy, how will we ever cope without him?" she sobbed loud enough for everyone to hear. I stood at the back, numb, watching her fake grief for the crowd while I knew full well her tears were mostly for herself. Paul had been the only steady source of income. Without him, how would she keep Lucas in the comfortable bubble he was used to? Lucas himself didn't even bother to look halfway presentable. He arrived in rumpled khakis and an old polo shirt. He spent most of the service hunched over his phone while Mom whispered excuses. He's grieving in his own way. Standing at Paul's grave, I couldn't ignore the bitter déjà vu. Another father figure taken by a heart attack, another funeral. Except this time I wasn't a clueless kid. I saw it for what it was. Mom's wailing wasn't about losing Paul. It was about losing Paul's paycheck. A year after we buried him, I'd nearly cut off all contact with Mom and Lucas. All I knew came through my Aunt Linda's occasional updates. "They're managing on what Paul left behind," she'd say. "Your mother sold his Chevy last month. The tools in his shed went before that." I tried to convince myself I didn't care anymore. But when Mom's number popped up on my phone one random Tuesday night, my stomach still flipped. "Emma." Her voice was small, almost fragile. "Could you come home? Please?" Something in her tone made me pack a bag and catch the first flight the next morning. When I pulled up to the old house on Pine Street, I barely recognized it. The lawn Paul used to mow every Saturday was buried under weeds. The paint on the siding peeled away in big flakes, and one shutter dangled crookedly over the front window. But the house wasn't the only thing falling apart. Mom opened the door, and I had to stop myself from gasping. The woman who once fussed over every hair out of place now had deep lines creasing her face and an inch of gray roots framing her scalp. Come in," she murmured, leading me to the living room. The air smelled stale, dishes stacked high in the sink, dust coating the mantel where Paul's photo still stood. I sat carefully on the old couch. A spring poked into my leg, something Paul would have fixed before it got this bad. Mom's composure crumbled immediately. "We're almost out of money, Emma. My pension barely keeps the lights on, and what Paul left us is nearly gone." She twisted her hands so tightly her knuckles turned white. "And Lucas? Is he helping at all?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. Mom's mouth tugged into a strange, defensive frown. "He's trying, honey. But these companies, they just don't understand him. The last place wanted him to start work at 8 in the morning. You know he's never been a morning person. And the job before that was manual work. For someone with his intelligence." My jaw clenched. "Mom, at his age and with zero experience, he can't be choosy." "You don't understand," she snapped, her voice climbing into that sharp tone she always used when protecting Lucas from the world. Then, as quickly as she'd flared up, she deflated. Her eyes shone with unshed tears as her voice dropped to a quiver. "Emma, we can't make it on our own. We need you. You're doing so well. Please help us." I knew exactly what she was asking, and every part of me wanted to remind her of all the times she'd chosen Lucas over me. But staring at her thin shoulders and trembling hands, the words caught in my throat. "How much do you need?" I heard myself say. When Mom said, "Can you send me $1,200 every month?" I nearly choked. That amount was no small sum given my income, yet somehow I still nodded. "Where's Lucas?" I asked, standing up to leave, already starting to regret it. Mom's face lit up just a bit. "He's interviewing with a very promising tech company." Through the window, I could still see the light from Lucas's room, the flicker of his computer screen, Some things never change. Keeping my word, I set up an automatic transfer. $1,200 into Mom's account each month. Every time I saw the deduction notice, I told myself I was doing the right thing, even if it meant postponing plans for a new car or a bigger apartment. I also started visiting more often, but every time I stepped through that worn-out front door, it felt like walking into a time capsule. Lucas was still glued to his computer, or sprawled out on the couch with a beer in hand. "How's the job search going?" he asked. "Mind your own business," he snapped, or sometimes just grumbled and turned up the game volume. During the holiday season, I couldn't stand how torn up the living room had become. Peeling wallpaper, water stains on the ceiling, things Paul would have fixed right away. I decided to use my year-end bonus to hire someone to repair everything. In February, Mom slipped and sprained her ankle. I called to check in. "Are you okay?" "I'm fine, just a little sore," she said, but I could hear the strain in her voice and the muffled groans. "Has Lucas been helping you?" "He's busy with online interviews." The next day, I hired an in-home caregiver, using the money I had saved for a vacation. Then one day, I came home with grocery bags in hand and froze in the living room. On the couch was a woman I'd never seen before. Heavy makeup, claws for nails, barely dressed, surrounded by snack wrappers and empty soda cans. "Who are you?" I asked, heart sinking with suspicion. Lucas poked his head out from his room. "This is Candy, my fiancée. She's moved in." Candy didn't even look up, just chewed her gum loudly and reached for the fancy cookies I just bought for Mom. "Nice to meet you," I muttered, swallowing my anger. That evening I called Mom and asked directly, "What do you think about all this?" Her voice was unusually cheerful. "Emma, isn't it great? Lucas is finally settling down. Candy's such a sweet girl. She's kept him from drinking with his bad friends for weeks." I remembered the pile of empty imported beer bottles in the trash, the ones that sweet girl had guzzled. But I didn't say anything. Mom continued. "He's planning to apply for a job at a startup. Candy has relatives working there. This could be a turning point for Lucas." I just mumbled in agreement. I'd heard about Lucas's big turning points so many times, I could recite them by heart. But seeing Mom cling to that faint hope, I couldn't bring myself to crush it. A little while later, I dropped by as usual, arms full of groceries. The moment I opened the door, I froze. The house looked like a war zone. Piles of dirty dishes, leftover food scattered. Someone's clothes tossed everywhere. Candy was sprawled out on the couch, glued to her phone. I set the bags down, trying to stay calm. "You're living here, eating food I bought. Could you at least wash a dish?" Candy looked up, smirked, her lip gloss gleaming. "Who do you think you are, barking orders? This isn't your house." I growled. "I grew up here. You're just a leech hanging off Lucas." Candy burst out laughing, her voice dripping with mockery. "How sweet, but you're mistaken. This house belongs to Lucas now. Your mom signed it over to him. It's all in her will." I ran straight to the kitchen and found Mom busy sorting through a pile of discount coupons she'd never use. "Tell me the truth, Mom. Did you really leave everything to Lucas?" My voice was shaking. Mom paused, avoided my eyes for a second, then her face turned cold. "Yes. It's true. Why? I'm the one who sends money every month, takes care of everything for you. Lucas does nothing." Mom snapped. "Don't you dare disrespect your brother. You never understood him. He's better than you, more lovable than you. Honestly, I never loved you as much as Lucas. And I don't want to see your face anymore." Those words stabbed into my chest like a knife. For over 20 years, I told myself Mom loved me, just differently from Lucas. Now I knew I'd been lying to myself. I turned and walked away, Candy's triumphant laughter ringing behind me like the final blow. 20 years of hoping, making excuses, trying to prove I was worthy. Everything ended with a soft click of that door closing behind me. During the 4-hour drive back to my own apartment, I couldn't remember the road, how I opened the door, or how I sat down on the couch. But I remember so clearly staring at my phone, seeing that automatic transfer. $1,200 every month for over a year. I let my finger hover over the screen, then firmly pressed, cancel recurring payment. In the weeks that followed, I threw myself into work, trying not to think about the sudden gap in my budget, a gap that now felt more like an opportunity than a burden. I started looking into investing, thought about buying an actual house for myself instead of staying cramped in a tiny apartment like always. And exactly 1 month after the last time I stepped into that house, Mom called, skipping any greeting, her voice sharp and demanding. The money didn't come through this month. Must be some bank issue. I took a deep breath, my voice surprisingly calm. There's no issue. I cancelled the transfer. The other end went silent for a few seconds. Then it exploded. What? How dare you? After everything I've done for you. I laughed. What did you do for me? You ignored me, made me wait on Lucas, and flat out told me you never loved me. And that's your idea of everything. Mom immediately switched back to her old tone, defending Lucas at all costs. You know I was just angry and didn't mean it. But you can't cut the money. Lucas and Candy are planning a trip to Mexico. They need a break. I held back the rage boiling in my head. A break? From what? He just plays games, drinks beer, and burns through my money. If you want to help him, tell him to get a job. Mom screamed. You ungrateful brat. You're just jealous he has everything and you have nothing. You'll regret this. I cut her off ice cold. You chose him over me. Let him take care of you then. Goodbye, Mom. Don't call me again. I hung up and blocked her number before she could unleash more curses. But she didn't stop. For weeks, I was attacked on every platform. Facebook messages whining about unpaid bills, Instagram comments calling me an ungrateful child, emails listing all her so-called sacrifices, which I barely even remembered. Lucas jumped in too, texting me curses. You made Mom cry, you heartless bitch. Send the money back or you'll pay for it. I blocked him too, but not before replying once. Simple solution, get a job. Even Candy didn't leave me alone. She hunted me down on LinkedIn with long messages about how I was breaking a poor old mother's heart, and how Lucas was too sensitive to handle the stress of working. I just shook my head and laughed. At least she was creative in making up excuses to squeeze money out of me. Now it's been half a year. I don't know how they're managing, and for the first time in my life I don't feel guilty about it anymore. Maybe Mom finally realizes Lucas can't freeload forever. Maybe they're still waiting for me to cave. Or maybe they've already found a new source. What I do know for sure is that the $1,200 I used to pour into that house is now sitting safely in my own house fund. I sleep so much better. No more jolting awake to angry texts or guilt-tripping midnight calls. I know Paul would be proud that I finally stood up for myself and won't let anyone take advantage of me again. A few days ago, driving past a construction site, I saw a big "Now Hiring" banner. For a second, I thought about snapping a picture to send Lucas. Then I just laughed and drove on. Their mess is no longer my problem. After all these years, I'm truly free. From this story, I realize that family doesn't always mean unconditional love. For years I sacrificed and tried to earn the approval of a mother who favored an irresponsible brother, only to get used and betrayed. Now I understand that sometimes you have to let go to save yourself. I've learned to stand on my own, value my hard work, and build a home where my kindness can never be exploited again. What do you think about the main character's choice? Would you have done the same in this situation? Share your thoughts below. And don't forget to follow the channel so you won't miss more touching real-life family stories coming soon.